Well, from what it seems, London is the capital of NLP. As it seems that there's more people in London know NLP than anywhere else on the planet. It seems oversaturated. So I'm sure I'm pushing against an open door with this in many ways. Body language, it's not just about the words that we say or the way that we repeat back or the way that we check meaning. There's also body language. And it's interesting as well, traveling, going to different places, different cultures. Hofstadter's cultural index is one thing to be aware of, the different relativistic measures of collectivism, individualism, masculinity, femininity. I can't remember the others off the top of my head, but it's interesting just to note the difference, but also interpersonal distance as well. In the UK, we have like this area of personal space, and it's about a metre. So when someone comes into within a metre of us, they're entering our personal space. I've noticed in the US, it's a little bit further out. And I've noticed in Malaysia, for example, it doesn't seem as though you're considered invading someone's space until about 40, 30 centimetres. It's a lot closer. And then there's other things like touching and gesturing, different gestures mean different things in different places. I'm sure we're aware of this. Eye contact, big one. Which eye do you look into when you're talking to somebody or when they're speaking and you're listening? I usually look into their left eye, but then sometimes the right eye. And I don't know, I find myself switching, sometimes looking away, sometimes looking down as if to pretend that I'm giving their profound statements deep and insightful consideration that it deserves. Look into their eyes generally. And I'm reminded of Clinton Bush Sr. at one of the TV interviews. One of the audience members asked a question about farmers and how difficult it was and what government could do. And Clinton got up off his stool and walked towards the audience member and answered the question. And Bush remained sat on his chair checking his wristwatch. It's things like that show you're not really interested. Kind of gives away the game. There's somewhere else I need to be. And I remember in sales as well, in the car dealership, boss used to go nuts when the salesman used to sit down and keep their overjacket on. Either they were cold or they had plans on going outside. It wasn't that they were sat here comfortably. It was like, I can't wait for this to get over, meeting with prospects. So it doesn't show a relaxed environment, well disposed, attentive, receptive. And then there's those words, yeah, really, oh, how interesting, just keeps it going. So it seems what we're doing at this stage is making room, and we've already talked about this, making space and time, letting people empty out. And then when they're slowing down and settling in on something that's causing them to think a bit, that's probably the time to ask a question, not interject or cut them off or use one of those 12 roadblocks to justify something, tell them what they ought to be doing, give them commands or advices or interrogate them. So it seems like when natural space presents itself. And one way it seems to do this is to be counterintuitive, not to pressurize them into coming more quickly, but to step back, relax, and let them recognize that they're going to have all the time they need to express themselves. There's no pressure, there's no rush. Okay, a few seconds pause and then you can interject with a question. But remember, this is about them, so it's not necessarily about us gathering information as questioners to make moralistic judgments or offer problems or solutions. It's more about helping them navigate their own feelings, thoughts, and areas of uncertainty. So we have to, as good listeners, ask good questions, not from our point of view, but what would be a useful question for them to ask themselves right now. So they're kind of in lead. We're just asking the questions that they probably would like to have asked of them, or the questions that they can't quite get to themselves. And that brings us on to the type of questions that we can ask. So we can fact gather. We can elicit dichotomies, yes or no answers. We can give preferred answers, which are still a restriction on choice. We can also ask rhetorical questions, which imply a preferred answer as well, don't they? So closed questions are obviously more controlling because we're restricting choice of answers. Open questions elicit an open frame, an open response. Could be anything. So I'm going to guess and say that when someone's blowing off steam, when they want to be listened to, we listen, we'll let them empty out a little bit. And then if we've moved beyond reflecting and and kind of feeding back a little bit of what they've said to us, if we're ready and willing and able to ask questions, it perhaps ought to be an open question. Even here, we have to be careful about limiting the topic of conversation. Tell me more is an instruction, but it's, for all intents and purposes, a question. Or you could soften it by saying, could you tell me more about that? How did you feel about that? If they're still in the emotional state. Or we can be a bit more specific. So instead of saying, tell me more about that, or how did you feel about that, we can say, how do you feel about that? How did you feel about that at the time? And how do you feel about it now? Which implies a vector or a change. Or provides a mental distance between identities, the person who experienced it and the person who's now reflecting upon it. So reflective listening requires the skills of refraining from using the roadblocks. So first off, learn the roadblocks. Second, turn those off. Give undivided attention. Right, that's quite a challenge in those two. So again, a couple of things to practice. Turn off roadblocks. Well, first become aware of the roadblocks, then know how to turn them off, and then practice just listening to everything. The words, what they could have used, to temporal markers, whether they're talking past, future, whether they're using modal operators of necessity or possibility, whether they're using, whether their speech has deletions, distortions, or generalizations. So whether they're using phrases like everyone, all the time, sometimes, or a little bit of the time. Lack of referential index, it, they, them. What's that mean? We don't know. We might guess, but these are things to be aware of that usually we don't know if they know, and it's up to us to find out or listen. Maybe it's not relevant. We've got to find out if it's relevant. So here we are. So I suppose I ought to run down the list then. This is from the NLP training meta model. So we have a pattern, and then some way that the meaning is changed due to something that's missed, deleted, or distorted or generalized through the expression. So the first one is mind reading, where we claim to know the internal state and meaning of another person, regardless of whether they've actually said anything. So this is where we might be tempted to say stupid shit like, you don't like me, do you? Claiming to know the mental state of someone else or their attitudes towards something. And this is a bit of a provocation as well. We talked about this one in the audio we might have done on Just Listen, or Talking to Crazy, or motivational interviewing. I forget now, so many. The next one is a lost performative. So this is where a value judgment is being expressed, but the comparison to whom or what moral is being missed out. So it's bad to be inconsistent is an example. Bad by who or what's measure. It's not specified. So maybe they're using an inappropriate benchmark, or they've got unrealistic expectations, either too high or too low. We don't know. There's a cause and effect distortion where we wrongly attribute causation. So you made me. Of course, no one really makes you do anything. And then confusing correlation with causation as well, or getting it back to front. Got to watch out for this one in statistics as well, because although there may be a correlation, the temptation is to then suppose that the result that we see was caused by something that we've assumed, because the correlation doesn't discount causation. See this one in nutrition a lot. Calorie in, calorie out. Well, no, not all calories are equal, because there's other processes that go on. And so the calorie itself isn't necessarily the cause of, say, getting fat or overweight. It's the composition of the food that goes in that contains those calories. So, for example, high fructose corn syrup, sugar, is not so good for keeping the weight off compared with the equivalent calories from, say, eggs. The next filter is complex equivalence, where we inappropriately interpret two different experiences as being synonymous. So this is where we say something like, she's always yelling at me, therefore she doesn't like me. Well, yelling, again, that's are kind of open to interpretation itself, and even if it's true that they say things at a volume that we don't like, or a volume that we consider excessive, does it necessarily mean that they don't like you? It may be that there's imminent danger that they're trying to warn you of. And one of my most hated is presuppositions, and especially in Christian apologetics. I just hate that shit. This is where we claim to have something as clearly self-evident without needing facts, data, proof or evidence. So this might be expressed in the common parlance as, if my husband knew how much I suffered, he wouldn't do that. Maybe he would do it more, we don't know. It's a presupposition. And then the next section is not so much to do with changing meanings, which the previous examples were, but this is about expanding limits. So this is where people use universal quantifiers, mentioned before. All, every, never, everyone, no one. These are huge generalizations. And then we'll have modal operators, and there's two flavors of these. Modal operators of necessity, where something is required, where it should be done, shouldn't, must not, have to, need to. It is necessary. I have to take care of her. I am obligated. I feel duty. I'm duty bound. And then there's modal operators of possibility or impossibility. I can't, I won't, I may not, I might not, it's possible, it's impossible. I can't do that thing. And then there's statements about information. One of my favourites is nominalizations. And this is where process words are presented as nouns. So in, say, this context, we're learning how to communicate with people. But then when it's expressed as a nominalization, it becomes communication. So the process of communicating is turned into the noun communication. And there's just so much wrapped up in something that's become nominalized. So when someone says it's a problem of communication, well, that can mean so many things. It could mean who's not communicating, how is something being communicated, or what is not or is being communicated that leads to being miscommunicated. So there's so much information to recover, and one of the biggest nominalizations is I, in respect of I self, me, I what? So many levels. Again, at what level do you mean I? Your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, your skills, the environment you're in, the behaviour that you do, the people you interact with, your cognitive stack, stress levels, cognitive abilities, what? I what? And then there's another section, unspecified verbs. So, for example, someone says, he rejected me. Okay, in what context? How? Specifically? When? How do you know? In what way? What made it a rejection? In other words, it's unspecified. And then we have simple deletions of information where things are not expressed. They're kind of left out, and sometimes this is on purpose, sometimes it's an unconscious thing because we don't want to face the truth, or we don't want to express fully. We want the other person to take a bit of the blame and help us out by obligating us, and so we usually express things like I'm uncomfortable. It doesn't specifically say what they're uncomfortable with or about, but it leaves an assumption in the mind of the recipient to make change, but we don't know, so now we're extra cautious because that's quite a big generalization. Similarly, there's another one called lack of referential index. Again, we mentioned this one: they, them, others. They don't listen to me. They are a conspiracy, Illuminati, Big Pharma. It's all they and them, but without being specific about it. And then there's a comparative deletion where we use phrases like better, best, more, less, least, worst, compared to what? Whilst we have our 12 roadblocks in our behaviour towards listening to someone, the speaker also has various roadblocks, cognitive errors, preferred approaches to conveying information, masking them using things like lack of a referential index, modal operators of necessity or possibility, presumptions, nominalizations, lost performatives. So these again are all things to be aware of, and each one is a choice point, an entry point to recover information, perhaps. Maybe, maybe not. I think before we get on to all that, though, we need to go back a step to being well disposed and attentive before people are receptive to any kind of questions. And that is a process of so-called reflective statements or reflective listening, So here we're trying to get in step with pace, walk side by side, get into the other person's shoes. So they're speaking, we're listening, we're starting to get the picture, but maybe we want them to tell us more, but we don't want to ask a question because it either restricts choice, directs the conversation flow. So we just need to ease in, I think, a little bit first. Do you? Are you? Forget it. Do you mean? Are you saying that? No, all questions. Plus also a quick word about tonality and inflection points, or inflection points. So the upward inflection is a question. Downward inflection statement. I think we know this intuitively, don't we? Ooh, is that up or down? Ooh, can't tell. So when someone's venting or saying a lot of words, they want to just get it out, and interrupting that flow by asking a question puts extra cognitive load on. I mean, imagine they're ranting and raving, really letting enough steam, and then you say, well, tell me 3 things that really bother you, and then at the same time, tell me 3 things that don't bother you at all. Mental overload. Also, again, putting a question in can so easily make it qualify as one of those 12 roadblocks, because a question is usually an ought or a moralistic question, or a should have done statement, or a guilt or blame installer too early on in the process for all that nonsense. We want to get into acceptance, not questioning. So acceptance is what? Agreeing with them. And agreeing with them is saying the words back that they said, not quite in the way that they said it. We'll get onto complex reflection later, but it's almost as though we have to be a witness to their experience. I mean, surely you've felt the phenomenon of something so strange and out of the ordinary happening that you had to tell someone. You just can't keep it to yourself. And when you articulate that rare experience or that mysterious happening that seems without explanation, it's frustrating when people look at you like you're mad and say, you're pulling my leg. No, that didn't really happen. And they try and deny your experience. It's infuriating. So refreshing is the person that says, really? Wow, that happened. No upward inflection. Resist. You had an exceptional experience. Resist. I so strongly want to put the inflection on there. Yeah, so I think this is it. Being a witness for them, not a judge of their experience. And so here is a question. So supposing you have one of these mysterious occurrences or something out of the ordinary happens, something so out of the ordinary, in fact, that people might not even believe what you've witnessed, and you want to share and you want to tell someone. Who is that someone? You're thinking of them right now. Who is that? And why did you select them as the person that you would want to share this experience with? What is it you anticipate about their reaction? So turn the tables then and imagine somebody else has had an amazing experience and they want to tell someone that similar things and share, and they come to you. What does that say about the way that they hold you in their mind? It's a certain high regard, isn't it? It's quite a responsible position. They're really seeking respect for their world, for their interpretation, for their experience. And I'm going to say something else that seems remarkable, and it's just from my experience. So take this part with a pinch of salt, but it's just an observation I've made. I don't have kids of my own, but I've gone around friends' houses and been lumbered with kids. And so there's a bit of an observation I've made because I've been able to come in from the cold. So you know how you get used to people's interactions and you get used to their ways, and then the behaviour normalises. But of course, if you come into the situation cold, you notice everything. So I noticed with, I don't want to call them babies, toddlers, 6 months to maybe 4 or 5 years old, that their way of navigating what's right and wrong or behaviour, I don't even want to say that's right or wrong, but just the way they seem to navigate doing things is by getting biofeedback from the parent. So I'll tell you a story. I was around a friend's house once, and the toddler was just at walking age plus, and I can't remember what age that was. And I can't remember the details, but the milkman had arrived, and there was milk just outside the door, and the door was slightly ajar, and the toddlers were within eyesight, within view, And the parent was facing me, and I could see the kids through the doorway and what they were up to, but the parent had the back to the doorway temporarily. And I noticed this one looking outside the door, because of course they're infinitely curious creatures. And so I nodded, because, you know, a young child going outside, parent might want to know. So the parent turned round, and the young child had grabbed the milk bottle and was struggling with all its might to bring the milk bottle in. And this caused the parent a great deal of concern. Parent leaps up out of the chair, and I'm thinking, oh no, here we go. Now, you could probably drop a milk bottle from 6 or 8 inches high, which is about as high as this young toddler was lifting this milk bottle, and it'd probably bounce. It'd just get a bit of spilt milk if the top came off. Nothing to cry about. But of course, parent rushing over to a child, arms waving in the air. Oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? Child looks startled. Let's go of bottle. Makes it happen. And I suddenly realised what was going on. So then I learned that when small children fall and scrape themselves, when they look at you, the first thing you should do is smile and laugh. And then, strangely enough, the child looks down at their wound, looks back at you and giggles, looks back down at their wound, and then they start laughing. I mean, obviously for a serious injury, it doesn't seem to always work, but the pattern's there, and it's when they look up at the parent rushing towards them in panic with anguish, with their arms flapping, that I think sends the kid into more hysteria. And it seems a bizarre reaction of parents to overreact, and it sets the kid off. It's just something I noticed. So, as I say, you know, I'm not a parent myself, but it's just an observation I made. What I've also noticed through friends and families, kids, especially younger ones, babies that are kind of becoming self-aware. You know, they see things with their eye, they start tracking objects. You can notice that they're focusing on it and they're looking around a room, and you can see that their iris pupil dilating, contracting, so that they're actively focusing on things. And they do this check again. When they see something in the room, they'll look to a parent or to an adult to see how others are responding to it. And that's how they learn the program. I've noticed also that when a child looks at something that they find bewildering and they look up to an adult to see the adult's response, if the adult is deadpan, expressionless, and remains so, it seems to upset the child even more. It's weird. It's like they're looking for an instruction on how to be guided. What do I do here? Parent is blank. Shit, parent doesn't know either. Wow, that's even more concerning. And at least if the parent's reacting like smiling or laughing, so okay, I can smile and laugh at this one. If the parent's saying, oh no, that's dangerous, okay, all right, I understand that's dangerous. But when parent has expressionless panic on their face, it seems to send the kid off even more. I think it's the same in active listening. When someone's talking, they're either airing their own emotional responses, they're looking for guidance, but they don't want to say, hey, you know, I'm in this situation, it's a bit scary, I'm a bit frightened, I'm looking for guidance here, or I'm looking for some help and assistance, because again, I maintain this is all we're doing in life. We're perceiving and making decisions. Sometimes we're not sure about our perception, sometimes we're not sure about our decision strategy. And all we're really doing in this process is saying, please help me see, please help me with my perception, and thank you. I've made a decision about life and it's now more wonderful. So 2 ways of looking at it from MVC is all people are doing is asking, please help, and saying thank you. And from, like cognitive, is it CBT? I'm not sure it even has a name, but the premise that all people are doing is perceiving and deciding. So they're not necessarily looking for judgment. They're not looking for people who have that crazed look in their eye that what you've said has induced panic in them, because that makes them feel even more worse now, because before they just thought, yeah, this is a minor problem that I need to work through. And when they look up to you and you've got wide eyes and panic on your face, it's like, oh shit, it's worse than I thought. That doesn't help. So this active listening is precious. And it kind of leads on to another thought as well, that if there are lots of people wandering around looking lost, feeling sad about life, I don't want to use the word depression because I know that is a kind of clinical diagnosis, but, in a colloquial sense, depressed. It's our assumption that something's wrong, something bad has happened to them, or they're in a sticky situation. But maybe there's something that's wrong is that no one's listening with compassion. Maybe that's all it is for sadness and, what we might call colloquially mild depression. But I understand, recognise it. Clinical depression is something else. But even there, I'm rambling a bit now, but I don't know how deep that rabbit hole goes, because it seems to me that we're social creatures, and if we're isolated, either because we don't talk to people, or because no one's listening to us, or because we're switching out our social interactions for online addictions, doing all social media online, leaving anonymous messages on forums to other people that are really just avatars, doing drugs to make ourselves feel good, or doing online porn to satisfy our human needs, that it is isolating. And after a while, we find that actually we don't need people, so we isolate ourselves. And I don't know whether that actually has physiological effects on the brain that do change things in there, that does lead to a clinical depression. Again, that's just my own crazy notion. As far as I'm aware, maybe there is evidence out there for that, maybe there isn't. I'm just speculating the notion that it's good to talk to people. But this calls into question many, many other things. Topical in the moment is genders, gender roles, normative gender, so-called toxic masculinity. Feminism is getting a bit of a bashing for whatever reason. But the way we talk to people also seems to be gender reinforced when we're very, very young. So you can imagine my milk story. Now, I didn't specify the sex of the child that was gone outside to pick up a milk bottle. I wonder what you thought when I said that the parent went running towards them, arms flapping, going, "Oh no, oh no." Yes, it was a girl. And I'm wondering if it was a boy, whether the parents wouldn't have just sat back and said, "Oh yeah, let the boy manage it," and that wouldn't have installed that kind of, you're doing something for yourself, and then the parent comes running with flapping arms, that indicates that you ought not to be thinking for yourself. But the boy gets away with it because, well, here we are. These are questions worth asking. So which one learns autonomy, and which one learns confidence, and which one learns that their behaviour is more moderated by what other people think of them? Big questions. And I suppose there's a notion that comes off the back of this, that when we want to share a thought with somebody, or a feeling that means a lot to us, it's important. It has to be important, or else we wouldn't want to share it. We only share stuff that's important to us. It might not be important to other people around us, but it's certainly important enough to us to want to share it. We want it to be understood, taken seriously, appreciated, respected. This is, kind of social interaction. It's what it's all about. We want to express ourselves and be heard. So again, I go back to the story of the milk bottle. What was the child doing? Thinking autonomously, wanted to be helpful, saw that the parent bring the milk in. They wanted to participate and do that, show confidence, show self-actualization, show that they're learning, show that they are signalling that they understand what normal behaviour around here is. People bring the milk in, and let me help, let me participate. And what do they get told? No, that's not for you, put that down. Unless it's a boy, just saying. So are we, what values are we validating by the way we listen and react to when people want to share their autonomy, their asking for respect and understanding? Go back to the 12 roadblocks again. What are we saying when we tell people, no, you need to do this, you ought to do that? Or even when we reassure people. So reassurance is a way of saying, I'm not really interested in listening to your story, but you're going to be all right anyway. It's the same thing. It's a dismissal. And so it seems, again, luck and fortune and circumstance. The milkman just happened to come by at that time, that the child just happened to be near the doorway, that the door just happened to be slightly ajar, that gets a certain behaviour rewarded or chastised. And it's these small coincidences of when we're young that start to build our personality, reinforce certain behaviours that we do again and that we either get chastised for or rewarded, that seem to mould our worldview and our process on how we integrate with society at large and how we interact with other people. It can, this is how societies rise, how cultures develop. Depends whether you live in the city, depends whether you live in the suburbs or out in the country. There's also interesting, I don't know whether the contradictions or paradoxes, I know that word's bandied around, but it's has a strict meaning. But there is something else I noticed as well, of people that go out for validation, or they go out for virtue signalling. They express some very narrow virtue or some good deed that they did, and it's the story that they keep telling over and over to get appreciation for that issue. Fine, yeah, okay. But the rest of their lives are incredibly secretive about, or they don't say much more about themselves, and it's strange because they might tell that story one time when they saved someone's life or some amazing deed. Sure, great story, you did well, that was a very virtuous thing you did, very honourable, you're a person of upstanding moral character. Wow, to do that cost you a lot in terms of the things you have to sacrifice to do the right thing. Very honourable, very virtuous. But so they keep getting reassurance about that one issue, that small aspect of their life. But because they don't talk about anything else, they seem to develop a insecurity about the rest of their life. And then that one event becomes what they're defined and known as. And then they start to feel weird about opening up the rest of their life because everything else will fall short. Or they'll realise that their worth or respect is only pinned to this one incident. So in a strange way, it makes them more insecure. So it's like reassurance isn't very reassuring to the person with too many secrets. God, life is so weird. So take your example. It might not be that they did one thing virtuous, or they happen to be in a position where they could save someone's life. Maybe they become very attuned and specific and skilled at doing one thing that gets some recognition, or they get overwhelmed by ambition or success in a particular field at the cost of everything else, because it gets that recognition. They are the best sales employee for 9 years running straight, and they're in the office 18 hours a day, 6.5 days a week. Okay. Or, they'll end up doing things for other people rather than themselves to get that recognition or appreciation. In a strange way, it's another attachment, another addiction. I should probably look up what addiction and attachment mean in terms of the point at which doing these things, these addictions, these attachments gets in the way of what is, I suppose, a normal and balanced life. So where we have social interactions and we exchange thoughts and ideas and we reciprocate emotions, and through that we can live vicariously through other people, or we can share our experience and have a normal interaction of emotional interaction. That's healthy. But when we say go to not doing that, sit at home, smoke weed all day, or